Clerics are the undisputed champions of divine magic in Dungeons & Dragons, but that doesn't mean they're locked into one category. On the contrary, from classic healing spells to radiant damaging abilities to darker necromantic powers, cleric spells run the gamut of applications. Plus, clerics automatically have access to all level-appropriate spells and are able to choose which ones they pair each adventuring day, so you never have to make a long-term commitment to a certain set of spells. Still, it's tricky to know which ones are the best ones, and even that term, best, isn't something objective after all. Party composition and campaign setting play a huge role in how powerful certain spells are. But to me, the best spells are the ones that are most likely to be most optimal in the most common conditions. It's that simple. So I'm going to go over my top 5 cleric spells in each level, give a quick breakdown of runners-up, and flash a quick 1 to 5 score to each of the spells that I don't cover at length. I'm also going to stop at 5th level spells, with my logic being that higher level spells are all situationally powerful, hard to compare, and less likely to be used in a campaign. Alright, now let's get into the best cleric spells for each level in D&D 5e. Starting with the best cleric cantrips. Number 1. Toll the Dead. Dealing 1d8 necrotic damage that scales to 1d12 against an injured target, Toll the Dead is the best and most consistent source of cantrip damage for clerics. Unless you plan on focusing on melee attacks, this is likely your best bet for a bread and butter ability in combat. Number 2. Guidance. A consistent 1d4 boost to your allies' ability checks is seriously useful. The two downsides are the concentration requirement interfering with long-standing spells and the touch range effect, and the fact that it can be a little annoying to use, so you have to police yourself to not use it all the time or run the risk of bugging the hell out of your DM, and possibly other players in your party. The 1D&D version of Guidance actually looks more usable and less game-slowing, even if it is a nerf overall. Number 3. Word of Radiance. This is the only area effect damage cantrip available to clerics. It's a con save, the worst in the game, and only 1d6 radiant damage, but if you're surrounded by enemies, especially undead, it's the perfect spell to cast. You can skip this one though if you never plan on getting your character into melee range. Number 4. Thaumaturgy. Right up there with Minor Illusion and Prestidigitation among top tier utility cantrips. It's somewhat more limited than either of those other spells, but the divine magic tricks really help define a cleric source of power right from early levels. There are too many potential uses of the spell to name here, but it's basically a divinely magical way to boost certain ability checks with a loud voice, flickering flames, harmless tremors, sound effects, remote door opening, and eye makeovers. Number 5. Light. Having this one prepared removes the need to carry a torch in dark places, allowing you and your allies to keep your hands free for weapons, shields, arcane foci, and the like. And for naysayers who clamor about how everyone has dark vision anyway, a creature with dark vision still has disadvantage on visual-based perception checks and is colorblind while in total darkness without a light source. Those are my top 5 cleric cantrips, but let's look at the other 4 options they have. The runner-up for next best cantrip is definitely Sacred Flame, which you can pick instead of Toll the Dead if you want radiant damage on a failed dex save instead of necrotic damage on a failed whiz save. You'll be limited to 1d8 damage at all times instead of Toll the Dead, which will usually deal 1d12. But if you really want to steer clear of necrotic spells for role-playing reasons, Sacred Flame's your best bet. Mending is good for a number of little tricks, but in my experience, players don't usually end up getting as much utility out of the spell as they hope. Resistance sounds good on paper, but the short duration, concentration requirement, and 1-action casting time make it infeasible to use almost 100% of the time. And Spare the Dying is no different than a healing kit, so there's no reason to waste a cantrip slot on it. That's cantrips. Now let's look at the best first level cleric spells. Number 1. Bless. This is hands down the best first level cleric spell in my opinion. A 1d4 bonus to all attack rolls and saving throws for 3 allies for a full minute is very, very strong. It works out to plus 2.5 average, and with several allies making several attack rolls and possibly a few saving throws in the course of a fight, it's 100% guaranteed to be useful. I won't get into 5e's system of bounded accuracy, but suffice it to say that small bonuses are more impactful than you might assume at first glance. From 1st to 20th level, Bless is always useful, especially when you can upcast it to cover the entire party. Number 2. Guiding Bolt. Clocking it at 46 radiant damage, an average of 14, Guiding Bolt is the hardest hitting, first level ranged spell in 5e. But it gets even better. The next ally to attack your target has attack advantage, so you're also increasing party-wide damage for the round when you cast it. If you can time this right to give your paladin a better shot at a critical strike or grant a rogue sneak attack who otherwise wouldn't have it, you'll do big damage and provide vital support all in one spellcast. Number 3. Healing Word. A bonus action ranged heal that brings back a small amount of hit points to an ally, 1d4 plus your wisdom modifier. While numerically small, in D&D this efficient, low-value heal is perfect for bringing back allies with 0 hit points who are making death saves. The bonus action part is extra nice, as you're still able to cast a cantrip, make a weapon attack, or use your channel divinity on the same turn you cast Healing Word. Number 4. Sanctuary. This defensive buff forces an enemy attacker to succeed on a wisdom save before attacking your target, a strong extra layer of defense. Many players avoid this spell as it ends the moment your target takes an offensive action, but a bonus action casting time and no concentration requirement mean that Sanctuary can be worth casting even if it only protects an ally, or yourself, for a single round of combat. This becomes especially true as first level spell slots become less important at higher levels. Number 5. Protection from Evil and Good. This spell protects an ally by giving many creature types disadvantage when attacking them, specifically aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, undead, and fiends, and it protects against a number of conditions from those creature types as well. The 10-minute duration means you can often cast this before a fight breaks out, and it's well worth your concentration if you're up against a big horde or a dangerous boss that falls into a creature type covered by this spell. Other runners-up for good first-level cleric spells are Detect Magic, Shield of Faith, and Bane, which can all be very effective in the right circumstances. Bane especially has a soft spot for me. As the debuff version of Bless, it's excellent at setting up other big damage or big impact control spells that rely on enemies failing their saving throws. Inflict Wounds is the highest first-level damaging spell in the game, and Cure Wounds is the numerically strongest healing spell in this tier, so they also get shoutouts, although each spell's touch range limits its utility. Command is fun, but it's a little much to spend a first level spell slot on at early levels. The other first level cleric spells, Create or Destroy Water, Ceremony, Detect Evil and Good, Detect Poison and Disease, and Purify Food and Drink, are all too situational to rate highly. Ceremony technically offers some cool buffs, but it's just a weird spell that encourages you to do weird things, like get married before a big fight. Up next, let's look at best second level cleric spells. Number 1. Aid. An 8-hour, no concentration spell that increases 3 allies' maximum hit points, stacks with temporary hit points, and can also act as a multi-target in-combat heal. At lower levels, this can work out to a 15 to 20% increase in a player's effective HP for a full adventuring day. Even more if they're able to take a short rest while it's active. This is even better and more efficient if your DM allows for rest casting, as you can then cast it at the end of a long rest right before you get your spell slots back for the day. Even without rest casting, Aid is an incredibly strong long-term buff that should always be up, especially once you have more spell slots to work with. Number 2. Hold Person. A great save or suck spell that'll paralyze an unfortunate target. That's good for limiting your opponent's actions, but it's also great for increasing the damage potential of your party's melee martial characters, who get to enjoy attack advantage and automatical critical hits against your target. Upcasting for multiple targets makes it even more impactful. Note that the value of the spell goes way down if you don't have many humanoid enemies in your campaign. Number 3. Spiritual Weapon. An incredibly efficient damage over time spell that only costs a bonus action to cast and trigger each round. Oh, and it doesn't require concentration, meaning you can stack its damage with spells like Spirit Guardians for monstrous persistent damage, before even using your action for the round. Note that one DnD does plan to nerf this one, so apparently the game's devs do think it's a bit strong, even if Pack Tactics doesn't think it's all that good. Number 4. Enhance Ability. A 1-hour buff that gives a target advantage on ability checks of your choice and some other goodies for the physical abilities. It's great to use in your party's face before a social encounter, on your party's resident grappler before a fight, and even for casting counterspell and dispel magic more effectively. This spell has too many other applications to discuss here, but suffice it to say that advantage on ability checks never stops being useful in a D&D campaign, keeping the spell relevant into the late game. Number 5. Silence. Spellcasters are usually the biggest threat in a fight, and this spell prevents spells with verbal components, about 95% of D&D 5e spells, from being cast. This is incredible, especially if you can ensure that spellcasters are stuck within the spell's area. Other runners-up for good second-level cleric spells include Augury and Lesser Restoration. Augury can be good if you ask the right questions and your DM's answers prove helpful, and it's a ritual, so you don't often need to burn a spell slot on it. Lesser Restoration doesn't cure the full range of negative effects, but removing a long-term poison effect or an in-combat paralyze can be incredibly clutch. Prayer of Healing is a good substitute for a short rest in a dangerous environment, and Warding Bond can be a handy defensive buff for allies depending on your character build. Protection from poison can also be dead useful in an appropriate adventure. Other spells at this level can be nifty sometimes, but are really the best choice to have prepared as your second level spells. Now things get interesting, as clerics have a ton of great spells at the next tier. So it's tricky to do this, but here are my best third level cleric spells. Number 1. Spirit Guardians. Cutting nearby enemy creatures' movement in half and dealing consistent area effect damage over time, Spirit Guardians is one of the best damaging spells in a Cleric's spellbook. In optimal conditions, it can deal an incredible amount of damage over the duration of a fight, while also creating a zone of control that is super strong. When combined with movement forcing abilities and or other slowing effects, this spell becomes even more godlike. Number 2. Tongues. The ability to speak and understand any language is as useful in D&D as it is in real life. Tongues isn't something you always need to have prepared, but if you're entering into unknown territory where conversation might help avoid a fight or learn more information, it's a necessary tool to have. Number 3. Aura of Vitality. This spell lets you heal allies for 2d6 hit points once per round as a bonus action for 10 rounds. While not a great in-combat heal most of the time, unless you're yo-yoing an ally from death saves for multiple rounds, this spell is great as an out-of-combat quick heal. In just 1 minute, you can distribute an average of 70 hit points among your party. Pretty solid if you can't risk taking a short rest, but you're low on HP. Oh, and it takes 1/10 as long to fully cast compared to Prayer of Healing. Number 4. Dispel Magic. Dispelling a magical effect will always be useful, as enemy spells are usually the biggest threat in any given fight. Beyond that, this spell can be used for solving puzzles, ending enemy buffs, and ultimately altering the momentum of an encounter. An essential thing to have prepared in your party, but you really need more than one on a spellcaster in your group. Number 5. Revivify. Your first access to Resurrection, albeit with a serious time crunch, just 1 minute. Still, once you have access to this spell and acquire the necessary components to cast it, 300 gold worth of diamonds, it's something that should always be prepared until you're able to access a better resurrection spell. Unless you're not too fond of the rest of your party, that is. Like I said, 3rd level cleric spells are super compelling, and I have a number of runners up that you could easily say belong in the top 5. Animate Dead, Clairvoyance, and Sending are all good spells for different reasons. Animate Dead nets you a long-term combat-ready ally, which is always useful if you don't mind a bit of necromancy. Clairvoyance can really help your party make plans and decisions in delicate strategic moments, and Sending is dead handy for communicating with quest givers for further instructions and for split party tactics. Mass Healing Word also gets a shout out as a decent in-combat group heal. Other 3rd level cleric spells can be useful from time to time, but they're not often things you need to have prepared regularly. At 4th level, the cleric spell list becomes shorter and more manageable. It also becomes a bit trickier to define the best 4th level cleric spells. Number 1. Banishment. Sending an enemy to a demiplane for a full minute on a failed charisma save, no extra saves on later rounds, is about as powerful as you can get. If you need to completely eliminate one enemy from the fight, or entirely if they're from a different plane of existence than you're currently on, there's no better spell. Numbers are everything in 5e's combat system, so when the big bad does come back after 10 rounds of combat, your party should have a much easier time dispatching them without their minions. Number 2. Death Ward. An 8-hour, no concentration spell that protects a target from falling to 0 hit points one time, leaving them with 1 hit point instead. This is a great spell to keep up on the party's tank at all times. And if your DM allows for rest casting, then there's really no reason not to cast a spell at the end of every long rest, provided you have a 4th level spell slot or higher to spare. Number 3. Divination. While DMs have tremendous leeway over how powerful this spell is in practice, it can be just the thing to do before making a major decision. And by the time you have access to 4th level spells, being able to walk into situations slightly less blind can mean the difference between life and death. Number 4. Freedom of Movement. A 1-hour, no concentration spell that makes an ally immune to the paralyzed and restrained conditions, as well as slow effects and the effects of difficult terrain. This is extremely useful on allies who require movement to fight effectively, like rogues and monks, and fights where they'll be hindered somehow. Number 5. Stone Shape. Making passageways through stone walls is the main power you gain with the spell, and it's useful as heck for dungeon dives. It can also come in handy for shutting passageways behind you or making stone trinkets, but breaking and entering is the real star here. To be honest, other 4th level cleric spells are a bit disappointing overall, but they can all be useful situationally. Let's wrap things up with the best 5th level cleric spells. Number 1. Summon Celestial. A 1-hour flying ally that deals decent damage, provides heals, and absorbs damage. Very useful to have around indeed. The defender version of the spell can also provide consistent temporary hit points to an ally. The biggest issue is that it's quite squishy and especially susceptible to area of effect abilities. Number 2. Greater Restoration. For less serious situations than death, Greater Restoration is your cure-all. Well, not really. It doesn't actually cover the conditions that Lesser Restoration does. Still, this spell is absolutely necessary for one party member to have ready at all times, especially once you reach the tier of play where it becomes available. Long-term curses can be nasty, and long-term debuffs to one of your allies' ability scores or hit point maximum can seriously hamper your party's overall strength. Not to mention all the weird effects and printed adventures that can be fixed with Greater Restoration. Number 3. Raise Dead. Yay, you can bring the dead back to life. As long as you've got a diamond worth 500 gold, you don't have to worry about the death of an ally ever again, as long as your target keeps all their limbs, organs, and head. You have much more wiggle room with Raise Dead than Revivify, 10 days as opposed to 1 minute to act, but the dead come back with a brutal debuff to all their d20 checks for a few days, so Revivify is still the better, and cheaper, option if you can act fast. Number 4. Holy Weapon, which makes a weapon magical and lit up and gives it 2d8 bonus on hit radiant damage. Great consistent perks for an hour-long duration. But my favorite part of the Holy Weapon spell is the bonus action you can use to dismiss it and cause it to blow up, dealing 4d8 radiant damage in an area of effect and blinding enemies in range as well. This does end the spell early, but it can make for an epic end to a final battle. The one drawback is that Spirit Guardian's Banishment or an upcast Bless or Hold person might be a better use of your concentration in many circumstances. But the one thing that Holy Weapon has going for it over those spells is that it lasts for a full hour, making it more efficient overall, provided you can use it in multiple fights. Number 5. Scrying. Getting to sneakily oversee what a big bad evil guy or their henchmen are up to can give you a huge advantage on how to approach an encounter, or it can move the plot forward much faster and much safer than you could otherwise achieve. Of course, like many divination spells, the overall power of scrying is very much in the hands of your DM. If they want to show you the big bad guy sitting on the toilet every time you cast a spell, it's not going to do you much good. But if you use scrying in good faith and don't abuse it, your DM should reciprocate and show some glimpses of useful and intriguing information. The big runner-up here is Commune, which is just a mega beefed up divination spell that gives you 3 truthful yes or no answers directly from your god, as long as your god has reason to have an answer to the question you're asking. But like scrying, its power is ultimately DM dependent. Other 5th level cleric spells have interesting use cases, but aren't as likely to be as useful as often as the spells I've just mentioned. That's all folks, here's a quick summary of my top 5 cleric spells for each level from cantrips to 5th level. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my breakdown, or if you think I've overhyped some spells and undersold others. I don't think there's too much value in covering the best 6th to 9th level spells, since they're generally all really good in appropriate situations. Plus, I think that most D&D games out there don't go too far past 11th level when these spells come online. As I said at the start, party composition and campaign setting play a huge role in how powerful certain spells are, so there's certainly some wiggle room here. Part of the reason I didn't want to do this as a tier list sort of thing, and why there's really no such thing as the best spells, just the ones that are the most likely to be most optimal under the most common conditions. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you found this guide on the best cleric spells helpful and can show your appreciation with a like and subscribe. It's a massive help for small YouTubers like me. I'd also love to hear your opinions on which cleric spells are the best, or worst, in the comments below. This is D&D Lounge wishing you the best of luck in your next spellcasting venture.